The call came on a Tuesday morning. I remember because I'd just put the kettle on, and the magpies were going mad outside that particular kind of racket they make when something's wrong in the yard. I answered the phone, and my solicitor's voice was steady, careful, the way he gets when what he's about to say is serious. "Barry," he said, "we need to talk about what happened yesterday." I already knew. I'd been awake since 3 in the morning knowing. Let me go back to the beginning, because none of this makes sense unless you understand what I built, and why I built it, and who I built it for. My name is Barry Cosgrove. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years working for a civil engineering firm in Newcastle, New South Wales. Not glamorous work, but solid, honest, the kind where you go home with dirt under your fingernails and a clear conscience. My wife Elaine passed away 11 years ago from a stroke. She was 55. One morning she was here, and by the afternoon she was gone, and I have never fully made peace with how fast that happened. After she died, I threw myself into 2 things: my work and my daughter. Her name is Wendy. She was 23 when her mother passed. Took it hard. Harder than she showed on the surface. Wendy's always been like that. Keeps things locked down. Smiles when she's breaking inside. Same as her mother, actually. I watched her grieve in her quiet way, and I made a promise to myself that I would do everything I could to make sure she was secure. Not spoiled, secure. There's a difference. I wanted her to have the kind of foundation that meant, no matter what went wrong in her life, she had something to stand on. So I kept working. I lived carefully. I didn't take holidays for years. I paid off my house in Maitland. Nothing. Flash. 3 bedrooms. A good-sized block. And I watched its value climb. By the time I retired at 62, the place was worth just under $800,000. I also had my super and a small investment property in Cessnock I'd bought in my 40s. I had a plan. Sell the Cessnock property when the time was right. Keep the Maitland house. Live on the super. Simple. Modest. Mine. Wendy had her own life by then, a job in HR at a logistics company in Broadmeadow, a flat she rented in Mayfield, a circle of friends I mostly knew by first name. She came to dinner most Sundays. We watched footy together. She was 34. Doing all right. And I was proud of her. Then she met Darcy. I want to be careful about how I describe Darcy Fenn, because I know how it sounds when a father says he never trusted his daughter's partner. It sounds like jealousy, like possessiveness, like an old man who doesn't want to let go. So let me be precise about what I noticed, and when I noticed it, and what I did about it. The first time I met him was at a Sunday dinner, about 8 months after Wendy mentioned she'd been seeing someone. She'd been vague about him, not secretive exactly, just vague, and when I pushed, she said, "He's just a bit private, Dad. Don't make it weird." I dropped it. He was 41, a year older than Wendy. Good-looking in a way that seemed deliberate, the kind of man who knows which angle to smile from. He worked, he said, in digital asset consulting, which I didn't fully understand. When I asked him to explain it, he did so in a way that took 3 minutes and left me knowing less than when he started. Wendy laughed and squeezed his hand. "He's terrible at explaining it," she said, "but he's very good at what he does." I smiled. I helped myself to more potato, but I watched him that evening. Watched the way he sat at the table, relaxed, in a way that wasn't quite comfortable, more like someone performing relaxation. Watched how he answered my questions with questions, pivoted from specifics, turned every conversation back to Wendy and how wonderful she was, how lucky he was, how he'd never met anyone like her. It was flattery, so consistent it started to feel like wallpaper. I didn't say anything to Wendy. Not then. She was happy. Happier than I'd seen her in years. And I told myself I was being an old cynic. They moved in together 6 months later, into a rental in Hamilton. Then, one Sunday in autumn, Wendy arrived at my place without Darcy and sat down across from me at the kitchen table with a look I recognized, the same look she had as a teenager when she'd done something she knew I wouldn't like and had decided to tell me straight rather than dance around it. "Dad," she said, "we want to buy a place together." I waited. Darcy has found an opportunity. A property development in the Hunter Valley. It's a joint venture. A few private investors. Land subdivision with approvals already in place. He says if we get in now, we could double our investment in 18 months. I put my mug down. He wants to put the rental money to work rather than just losing it every month. And he thinks the timing is right. She paused. "We're talking about me selling my flat." She'd bought that flat 3 years earlier with some savings and a loan I'd helped her with, a small amount. Just enough to get her across the line. It wasn't worth a fortune, but it was hers. It was real. I chose my words slowly. "What does Darcy bring to this investment?" She blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, if you sell your flat, what does he put in?" She looked slightly uncomfortable. "He's putting in the contacts, the knowledge. He knows the developer personally." I nodded. I asked if I could see the documents. She said she'd ask Darcy. The documents, when they arrived by email 2 weeks later, were professionally formatted and thoroughly vague. There was a company name, Hartwell Venture Partners, an ABN I noted down, projected returns with asterisk disclaimers, and a 1-paragraph bio of the developer that contained no verifiable details. The lawyer named in the documents had an address in a suburb of Brisbane. I ran the ABN through the ASIC register that night. Hartwell Venture Partners had been registered 14 months earlier. No financial history. No public filings of substance. The phone number on the website went to voicemail with a recorded message that gave no name. I called Wendy the next morning and told her what I'd found. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Dad." Darcy explained that the company is new because it was specifically set up for this project. That's normal for these kinds of structures. "Who told you that?" "Darcy." I asked her to hold off for a few weeks. "Let me speak to my solicitor, Terry Callahan. I've had Terry since the mid-90s. He's seen everything and trusts nothing on first glance, which is exactly what you want in a lawyer." She agreed, but with a reluctance that told me the decision was already made in her mind, and what she was really giving me was the appearance of consultation. Terry took one look at the documents and called me back within an hour. "Barry, I can't find a single director associated with this entity who has a verifiable professional history. The developer they've listed doesn't appear in any council approval records for the Hunter Valley. I'd want a lot more before I was comfortable with this." I told Wendy exactly that. She told Darcy. And that was when things shifted. He rang me himself that evening. The warmth in his voice was still there, but underneath it now was something else, a pressure. Subtle, like a hand on the back of your neck. He explained that there was a closing date on the investment opportunity, that other investors were circling. That hesitation now could mean missing the window entirely. He used phrases like generational wealth and asymmetric return profile and the kind of opportunity that doesn't come back. I said, "Darcy, I'd like to speak to the developer directly." He said that wasn't possible at this stage due to confidentiality agreements. I said, "Then I'm not comfortable recommending this to Wendy." The warmth left his voice. He said, very politely, "Barry, I understand your hesitation, but I want to be honest with you. Wendy is an adult, and this is her financial decision. I'm not sure it's your place to block it." I told him I wasn't blocking anything. I was giving my daughter information. We said goodbye with the kind of courtesy that two people use when they have decided they dislike each other. Wendy sold the flat 8 weeks later. She called me the day the settlement came through, and her voice was bright and certain in a way that I knew she was also trying to reassure herself. I didn't argue. I told her I loved her. I said to call me if she needed anything. She put $240,000 into Hartwell Venture Partners. For 4 months, she received monthly updates, PDFs with graphs and percentages, progress photos of what was apparently a development site in the Upper Hunter, no address, just photos of machinery on red dirt. Darcy printed them out and brought them to Sunday dinner once, laying them on the table like evidence of something magnificent. Then the updates stopped. She called me on a Wednesday evening, and I could hear immediately that something was wrong. She said she'd tried to reach the Hartwell contact number, and it had been disconnected. She'd emailed and gotten no response. Darcy was looking into it, she said. He was making calls. He had a contact who was trying to reach the director. I drove to her place that night. She was sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open, and that look on her face, not the teenage look this time, but something older and more frightened, the look of someone who has begun to understand the size of what has gone wrong. Darcy wasn't there. He'd gone to meet someone, she said. Someone who might have information. Wendy, I said. I need you to listen to me carefully. She looked up. I want you to call the police and file a report tomorrow morning. Not after Darcy talks to his contact. Tomorrow. She started to say something about giving Darcy time to sort it out. He's had 4 months, I said. And the company has vanished. She came to me, then got up from the table and hugged me like she was 12 years old and her football team had lost and the world was ending. I held on and said nothing, because there was nothing useful to say in that moment except that I was there. I went home and rang Terry. Terry was on the phone to me for 40 minutes. He'd done some more digging in the months since I'd first brought him the documents, call it instinct, call it professional caution. And what he'd found had been sitting in a folder, waiting to become relevant. Darcy Fenn, he told me, did not appear in any professional register associated with financial services in Australia. There was a Darcy Fenn who'd been involved in a civil dispute in Queensland in 2019, a property-related matter that had been settled out of court. There was another matter in 2021 involving a complaint to Consumer Affairs in Victoria, no public resolution. These were not criminal convictions, but they were a pattern. The woman in the Queensland matter, Terry said, was 58 years old at the time. She'd invested her redundancy payout on advice from someone matching this description. I felt sick. I said, "How many times has he done this?" Terry said he couldn't be certain, but the shape of it was familiar. What came next was the part I hadn't anticipated, and I say that as someone who had already anticipated quite a lot. Darcy came to my house. He came on a Saturday morning, unannounced. Knocked on the door like it was a social call. When I opened it, he was standing on my front step in a collared shirt, looking composed. He asked if he could come in. I said no. He said, without any particular change in expression, that Wendy was struggling with the situation and that he was trying to support her through a difficult time. He said he hoped I wasn't making things harder by creating doubt between them. He said Wendy had told him about our conversation, and he wanted me to understand that the investment situation was complicated by circumstances outside his control. I said, "Which circumstances?" He said there had been issues at the developer end that he was still working to resolve. I said, "Terry Callahan has been looking into Hartwell Venture Partners and the developer you named. Do you want to tell me what he found? Or would you like me to?" Something moved across his face, not quite fear, more like recalibration. He looked at me for a moment with an expression I don't think was meant for me to see. Then he said, "I think you need to be careful about making accusations, Barry. Wendy is my partner, and I'll be protecting her interests, including legally if necessary." He left. I rang Terry the moment his car turned the corner. Terry had already been preparing a statutory declaration on Wendy's behalf and had made contact with the NSW Fair Trading Office regarding the investment scheme. He now advised me to do 3 specific things. First, have my own assets, my house, my Cessnock property, my super placed into a structure that made them difficult to access by any party, acting without my direct instruction. Second, document everything. Every conversation, every message, every visit, date and time. Third, tell Wendy what Terry had found about Darcy's history, not as an accusation, as information. The second thing was harder than the first. I asked Wendy to come over for dinner that Sunday. Darcy wasn't with her. She said he was at a friend's place. We sat at the table where she'd been coming to eat her whole life, and I laid out what Terry had found, piece by piece, calmly, with the documents printed out in front of her. She didn't speak for a long time. When she did, she said, "He told me you'd try to do this." I looked at her. "He said you'd never accepted him, that you'd use any excuse to undermine us." Her voice was steady, but her hands were flat on the table, pressed down, the way she does when she's working hard not to cry. "He said you were jealous of the fact that I have someone. Wendy, look at the dates on these documents." She looked. The Queensland woman lost $60,000. She was a few years older than me. Silence. The Victorian complaint was filed by a woman in her late 40s. Similar circumstances, a private investment opportunity. A company that dissolved. She pushed back from the table and stood up and said she needed some air. I let her go. She stood on the back veranda for 5 minutes while I sat at the table and looked at my hands. And when she came back inside, she sat down again and said, very quietly, "He's not going to hurt me, Dad." I said, "I know you believe that." She left without eating. I washed up alone. For the next 3 weeks, I didn't hear from her much. A text here and there. Brief. Darcy had apparently told her I was running a campaign against him. I wrote her a letter, not an email. A letter. Handwritten, and said that whatever she decided, I was her father. And that door was always open. And I was not going anywhere. Then, on a Monday morning, she rang and said, "Dad, I need you to come." I drove to her place. She was alone. She'd asked Darcy to leave, not permanently, she said, but to give her space to think. Her eyes were red, but her voice was clear. She'd done some of her own searching over the weekend. She'd found the Queensland case. Through a public court records search, she'd found a forum post from 2022 inches, which a woman described an almost identical sequence of events. The consulting role, the private investment, the manufactured urgency, the company that stopped responding and named a man whose description matched Darcy in every detail. "It's not just us," she said. "No," I said. "I don't think it is." She filed a report with the police the following day. Terry coordinated with them and with NSW Fair Trading. The investigation moved at the pace. Investigations move slowly, with paperwork, with frustrating silences broken by sudden activity. What emerged over the following weeks was that Darcy Fenn was not operating alone. Hartwell was one of at least 3 entities connected to a small network of people running similar schemes, targeting women in their 40s and 50s, primarily in regional NSW and Victoria. The money wasn't recoverable. It had moved quickly through accounts and was, Terry said, almost certainly gone. $240,000. Gone. I want to be honest about how that felt. It wasn't just the money. I've never been primarily a money person. It was the knowledge of what that money had been. It had been Wendy's foundation. I had helped her build it, and someone had walked into our lives with a smile and a collared shirt and taken it away. And the worst part was that he had used her love, her genuine love, her real hope for a future with someone as the instrument. Darcy was charged in the end. Obtaining financial advantage by deception under the Crimes Act. There were other charges relating to the broader network. He did not come back to Wendy's door. He knew better. Wendy moved back to the Maitland house for several months while she got her footing back. She was quiet. And she was angry. and she was humiliated in the way that intelligent people feel humiliated when they have been deceived. Not because they were stupid, but because they were trusting, which is entirely different. I want to be clear about that. What happened to her was not a failure of intelligence. It was a failure of someone else's decency. She's in her own place again now, renting, cautiously rebuilding. She calls most evenings. We watch footy together on Saturday afternoons, same as always. I'm not going to pretend the relationship is unchanged, because nothing is unchanged by something like this. But she's here. She's talking. She's doing the work of putting herself back together, which is the hardest work there is, and she's doing it with her eyes open. There are things I wish I had done differently. I wish I had been more direct with Wendy earlier, not louder, but more direct. I softened my concerns because I didn't want to seem like the disapproving father. And in softening them, I left room for doubt that shouldn't have had room. When something feels wrong about the person your child is with, you can say so with love. The saying of it isn't the problem. The how and the when matter. But the saying matters more. I wish I had understood sooner that men like Darcy Fenn are not anomalies. They are a pattern. They find people who are warm and hopeful and generous, and they mirror those qualities back until the person believes they've found something rare. Then they remove the mirror. The warmth was always yours. The hope was always yours. They just borrowed it long enough to take what they needed. I also want to say something to any father or mother who reads this and recognizes something in it. It is not your job to control your adult child's life, but it is your job to tell them the truth, even when the truth is unwelcome, even when you're afraid of the distance it might create between you. That distance, if it comes, is usually temporary. The consequences of silence are much harder to undo. There are things you can do. Put your own assets in proper legal structures. Talk to a solicitor, not just a friend. If someone presents an investment opportunity to your family member and you can't verify the company's history through ASIC, that is a red flag, not a bureaucratic inconvenience. If someone discourages questions about their background, pay attention to that. Healthy people do not discourage questions. And if you find yourself standing on a front step at 64, watching a man drive away who has just implied he might take legal action against you for protecting your daughter, do not panic. Document everything. Call your solicitor. Trust what you know. The magpies were going mad again this morning. I put the kettle on and listened to them for a while before I answered the phone. I've learned to pay more attention to what's happening outside my window. Sometimes the noise is just noise, but sometimes it's the world trying to tell you something, and the difference is worth knowing. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened. Not to keep replaying it, I'm too old for that kind of torture, but to understand it properly. Because I think there's something in this story that goes beyond Wendy and Darcy and a vanished $240,000. Something worth saying out loud before I close the door on it. The thing about Darcy is that he didn't succeed because Wendy was foolish. I want to say that again because I mean it completely. My daughter is not a foolish woman. She is warm, and she is hopeful, and she wanted to believe she'd found someone who saw her clearly. Darcy read that about her within the first few months, and he used it. That's not her failure. That's a calculated decision he made, and the weight of it sits entirely on him. But I've also had to be honest with myself about my own part. I knew something was wrong from the first Sunday dinner. I felt it, that low-level unease you get when a person's performance doesn't quite match their substance. And instead of saying so directly, I hedged. I softened it. I asked careful questions and waited to be proven wrong, rather than trusting what I already knew. I told myself I was being fair. What I was actually being was conflict-averse. And in the space of that avoidance, Wendy made a decision she can't undo. There's a kind of intelligence that takes years to develop, and it has nothing to do with education or career or how many books you've read. It's the intelligence of pattern recognition, learning to trust what your gut is telling you, even when you can't yet articulate why. I had that instinct about Darcy. I just didn't act on it with enough conviction. That's on me. And I've owned it. What I've learned, what this whole grinding experience has taught me, is that the people who cause this kind of damage rely almost entirely on our reluctance to cause a scene. They rely on us not wanting to seem difficult, or jealous, or paranoid. They know that most people would rather extend goodwill one more time than risk an awkward conversation. That's the gap they walk through. Every single time. So if there's one thing I want to pass on, not as a lecture, just as something I now know to be true, it's this. Say the uncomfortable thing early. Say it with love. Say it without blame. But say it. The alternative is saying nothing and living with what the silence allowed. Wendy is rebuilding. It's slow, and it's not pretty, and some days she rings me and doesn't really want to talk, just wants to know someone's there. I am always there. That hasn't changed, and it won't. I'm 64 years old, and I've buried a wife and navigated 30 years of working life, and I still got caught flat-footed by a man with a collared shirt and a plausible story. That keeps me humble. It also keeps me paying attention. Because the truth is, the world has always had people like Darcy in it, people who take what they need and move on, and the only thing that changes the outcome is whether the people around the target are paying close enough attention and whether they have the courage to say what they see. I have that courage now. I wish I'd used it sooner.